With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Following Russian airstrikes that killed 7 in Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky again urged allies to provide more air defense systems and protective equipment, warning that more of everything is barely enough as Ukraine faces a fourth winter of war. He noted one victim was Natalia Kondemchuk, widow of a Chernobyl operator killed in 1986. The U.S. has spent over $130 billion aiding Ukraine since 2022, while Russia now controls about one-fifth of the country and continues slow advances. With Ukraine outnumbered and energy security threatened, Zelensky insists sustained Western support is essential to prevent further territorial losses. 8 NATO members, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden, will jointly fund a €430 million military aid package for Ukraine under a new program allowing Washington to supply weapons while Europe pays. The move comes amid Ukraine's deepening corruption probe tied to energy sector embezzlement involving Zelensky's former partner Timur Mindich. EU diplomat Kaja Kallas urged Kyiv to tackle GRAP very fast. President Trump criticized Europe's reliance on U.S. funding, claiming Washington has already spent $350 billion on Ukraine and will shift financial responsibility to NATO allies. Finnish President Alexander Stubb warned a Ukraine ceasefire is unlikely before spring and urged Europe to show sisu, endurance and grit, as Russia intensifies hybrid attacks. Speaking to the AP, he said Kyiv must quickly address its corruption scandal, but insisted Europe should increase military and financial support while Russia gains ground. Stubb, who maintains a working relationship with President Trump, said peace depends on security guarantees for Ukraine, economic rebuilding, and territorial discussions.
We can interpret a situation. I can explain to President Trump what Finland went through, or how I see the situation on the battlefield, or how do you deal with Putin. And then, if he accepts 1 out of 10 ideas.
Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini cautioned that Western aid to Ukraine may be lost to corruption after Kyiv was rocked by a $100 million energy graft scandal involving President Zelensky's associate Timur Mindich. Salvini, opposing further arms shipments, said Italy should not fund corruption and urged peace talks, calling the EU's approach a path to death. The warning came as Italy approved its 12th military aid package and amid growing EU concern about endemic corruption in Ukraine, which Moscow claims drains Western taxpayers' money. The Trump administration formally designated 4 European Antifa cells as terrorist organizations, the first such international listing. The groups include Germany's Antifa East, the Hammer Gang, Italy's Informal Anarchist Federation, and Greece's Armed Proletarian Justice and Revolutionary Class Self-Defense. The U.S. cited bombings, assaults, and attacks on capitalist institutions. The designation freezes assets and bars members from entering the U.S. Germany's Antifa East is linked to violent attacks in Budapest and Dresden. Far-left activists responded online, calling for militant organization in defiance of the ban, while Washington vowed to keep targeting Antifa worldwide. Labour MP Clive Lewis became the first from Prime Minister Keir Starmer's own party to openly call for him to step down, urging Labour to bring Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham into Parliament as Starmer's replacement.
Without any kind of resolution on the horizon. And I think the Labour Party, the Labour grandees, the men in grey suits, need to now really seriously think, how do we get Andy Burnham back into this parliamentary Labour Party and let him step up and become the next Prime Minister? That's my personal view. I know it won't be shared by everyone, but I don't see many other options.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to the Protagonists and the World Today. Nice to have your company on a Monday. Today we're looking at something that is going to divide and is dividing the whole of Australia, and it is that government's intention. Native title and Aboriginal land transfers and injustice. On the 7th of November 2025, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people lodged a native title claim over most of Melbourne. That's about 10,000, almost just below 10,500 square kilometres from the Yarra Valley to Werribee. Now, the claim, like others, isn't about private homes or suburban backyards. It's about Crown land, parks, rivers, reserves. That's about 30% of the state of Victoria. Now, in Queensland, there is a native title claim over much of the Redlands Coast. It was filed by the Quandamooka applicants with the Federal Court of Australia in March 2017 and has been in train for 8 years. The Quandamooka Coast Claim covers around 530 square kilometres, including a small part of Brisbane City and most of mainland Redlands, as well as areas of Lamb Island, Macleay Island, Karragarra Island, Coochie, Mudlo Island, Cassim Island, Sandy Island, Garden Island, Green Island, King Island, St Helena Island, and Mud Island. Now, these are just two of the claims. As of April 2025, a total of 647 determinations of native title have been made in some or all of the areas claimed. There are 131 native title applications that have not been decided as yet. So far, native title has been determined over approximately 54% of Australia's land and waters. What are native title rights? How do they differ to private property rights? What happens to the land that was previously managed for public benefit with the investment made by taxpayers? Are these benefits appropriated by the new title holders? What becomes of resource and mineral rights that may have been developed for the benefit of all Australians? Today we're asking our panel to discuss some of the implications of land transfer under native title and state government laws. And why do we know so little about the transfer of public benefits to a very small minority of Australians with no scrutiny or legal recourse? It's a very, very serious thing. We have to look at this and ask them why we have this great divide. We used to have the Great Dividing Range. Now we have just a Great Divide, because the Great Dividing Range has been raised from the very top to put in thousands upon thousands of windmills, wind turbines. My first guest is an old friend of ours now, not so old, he's much younger than we are. Jordan Ditloff is a libertarian advocate for capitalism and civil liberties, free speech, free humans, and I love that part, free money. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, it's not the sort of free money that our socialist comrades like to talk about. It's free money free of government restrictions like Bitcoin and other excellent blockchain, but it is a nice thought.
Just your thoughts, briefly your thoughts on what's happening to Australia right now with the native land titles.
Well, look, yet again, Victoria is in the news for all the wrong reasons. I feel like I'm the token Victorian summoned forth to explain how the hell we got here and how things could get so bad. And it's also doubly ironic given the past conversation we had, or the past two conversations we had about racism in Parliament and about some of the national park lockouts here in Victoria. And what's happened here is essentially almost a bit of a first mover race between possible competing First Nations Aboriginal Landowner Corporation claims. The Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, I'm told, are the most organised and well-resourced, and they, along with my colleagues at Slater Gordon, who are very renowned for doing a lot of work for union-related and left-wing causes, have filed an application with the federal court for this claim. So basically, as you outlined, native title isn't freehold title, and in fact, a grant of freehold title is held to extinguish native title. And native title normally accords with it a bundle of rights that often involves ability to access the land, conduct ceremonies on it, to hunt, fish, camp, but also, and I think this is the native title right that I think is the most concerning, given how we've seen this sort of thing used. It gives the holder of native title the right to be consulted about things that happen on that land, and that's concerning because what the sort of land that this title will be granted over is land that could be used for housing, for example, for private property, for release by councils and state governments, to allow for more opportunities to build, for towns and settlements to grow. That can still theoretically happen, but what will almost certainly follow is the rise of the dreaded black tape, which adds to the already huge albatross around the neck of the construction industry in Victoria. And yeah, essentially we've got this big ambit claim. It isn't strictly speaking related to treaty, but you'd have to be a pretty gullible person. And if you're going to argue with me that it's not related to the timing of treaty, then I've got a bridge to sell you, because I think that it's pretty clear from the timing of it and from some of the comments that Jacinta Allen, our Premier, has made, that there's a real desire to use the momentum they see from treaty to sort of ram this through. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what I mean when I say that, because there's the technical legal criteria to make a native title claim that, if it goes to court and if it's disputed by governments, need to be proven. But unfortunately, a feature of our legal system is that if opposing parties or a respondent and applicant in a civil proceeding reach an agreement or a settlement by consent, then it doesn't matter whether all of those quite difficult to prove criteria are made out. So I'm concerned, and this is all going to be put on the public record, I suppose, that I've said this. So if it happens, we can maybe have a future conversation about it. But I'm concerned the state government of Victoria, who's one respondent, certainly will consent to it. They'll bend over backwards to make whatever arrangements they can. And the federal government hasn't put forward a position yet, but I'm very, very sceptical as to whether they'll actually fight and require the elements of native title to be proven here.
Shalini Barsin is president of Brisbane Eastside branch of Libertarians Queensland. Thanks for joining us. What's your, just a brief overview on what we're facing at the moment?
Mike, we've been facing the brunt of it in the last 20 years. So for the Bayside, it's been 20 years in the native title thing. So it started with the 2011 North Stradbroke Island claim, and then it was the Moreton Island claim. And now, currently, in the last 7 years, there's been a coastal claim which covers almost 75% of our urban area in the Redlands Council. Now, we have observed the development of this in the last 10 years or more, and we're just confused with where we stand with this current claim, because first it was the islands, and then the locals had to compromise with their camping rights, their visiting rights. They kept a blind eye to all the funding that was going on these islands. But it seems like there is no stop to this, and millions of dollars have been spent in fighting for this claim in the federal courts. And Redlanders are just exhausted from it. Our council rates are the highest in the state. And why are we funding for all this, which is not giving any benefit whatsoever to the local area? Now, Redland Bayside is one of the most beautiful tourism opportunity. There's so much of tourism opportunity here. There's so much of sports recreation opportunity over here. And everything is in halt because of these claims. And it's just, as residents, we don't know where we stand. And what is most annoying for us is nobody is fighting for us. And yeah, it's just a fight we have to fight now as citizens. And that's where we are starting the discussion. And we hope we can bring awareness to the people that how serious this is. And as much as they say, it doesn't impact your right, your property rights, that's not true. There are many, many layers to it, and they need to be unfolded. We are in the middle of something which we need the best of the minds in the country to have the courage to come forward and tell us where are we heading. And Redland wants a voice in the country. We want to be heard by the parliamentarians now.
And our third guest, again, a great friend of what we do here, Peter Campion, libertarian and proponent of traditional Australian values. And I would see what's happening at the moment as it's absolutely thumping the traditional Australian values right on the head. How serious, Peter, is this for Australia? We probably
Sorry,
need to-
Mike.
That's right.
Yeah, we had a bit of a puppy event in the background there. So hence the muting. This is a planned attack on Western civilization. Now, what Shelley and Jordan and yourself have already outlined is how confusing this is and how this doesn't seem to make sense. And it's basically throwing a spanner in the works of a very efficient machine that our forebears built for generations. So from the time of settlement in Australia, our culture has worked towards unifying people, towards assembling an Australian nation from scratch, from bringing people from all over the world to work together to build a nation that was functional, that lifted people of both sexes and all races out of poverty and misery. And we were doing very, very well, right up into the 80s, which were probably the halcyon years of the last century and a half. And then all of a sudden, simultaneously, all around the world, this division started. And it's not organic, Mike, and you've probably noticed that. It seems to be the same playbook rolled out here as in Canada, as in EU countries and certain US states. And it's always designed to divide people by race, to give the wealth of the nation to a small minority, and often that wealth doesn't reach the ground. And my patch is far north Queensland, which includes Cape York. And in my first career as a Commonwealth Government fraud investigator, I'd visit the remote Aboriginal communities, and it was self-evident that these vast sums of money weren't getting to the people on the ground. So as Shelley touched on earlier, where does it go? And the answer is it goes back to the very people that are creating this division. It's not disorganised. It's clearly a coordinated structure being implemented right around the world. And of course, that brings us back, as so many modern topics of discussion do, to who is running this global playbook. And of course, we call them the globalists, just for want of a better term to narrow it down. So all of this division, like we voted no to the voice. If we're given the chance, we'd vote no to treaty. But it's being foisted on us anyway. And not just in Victoria, as Jordan outlined. It's in South Australia and Western Australia, and it's coming to Queensland. It's as inevitable as sunrise. And it's not coincidental, it's not accidental, it's not organic. There's a lot of money behind it. It's being driven for a purpose. It's to collapse Western civilization. I call it the Cloward-Piven 2.0 strategy. So the Cloward-Piven strategy, as most viewers here will know, was designed to use a nation's welfare systems to collapse capitalism so they could introduce communism by default. But these days, it's not just the welfare systems, although, the NDIS has got to be a welfare system on steroids, just untraceable, unauditable waste. People getting paid $90 an hour to supervise a pensioner at the pokies. I mean, if that's not Cloward-Piven 2.0, I don't know what it is. Well, that's 1.0, but 2.0 is this Aboriginal land rights industry. It's the blocking of mining. It's $1 billion to host a climate conference. Wherever you look, $443 million for a reef foundation that no one had even heard of, for a reef that doesn't need any help at all. I mean, the only real threat to the reef is foreign fishermen. It's certainly not. I mean, CO2 can't trap heat for a start, and even if it could, infrared can't heat water. It can only evaporate the outermost layer, which has a cooling effect. So there's nothing we're doing to the reef that warrants the vast spending on it. It is purely and simply a way of taking the productivity of the nation and flushing it down the drain while creating as much division as possible so we're all constantly at war with each other. And we're not looking at who's pulling the puppet strings, who's operating the government marionette. But, we'll never get this out on any of the major media platforms. Thank goodness we've got The World Today and other smaller media platforms so that, with luck, people will take clips, they'll share them on social media. Well, as long as we're allowed to before the digital ID comes in and you lose your
Not long for that, Peter.
credits.
Not long for that. A couple of weeks before we know it. And then the sneaky bit, what about on the 27th of December when you have to have your ID to go to a search engine? Why would they do that on the 27th of December? And that would be scurrilous of me to say that they do have something up their sleeves. If you wouldn't mind, somebody has a radio playing at the moment in the background, and we're hearing an array of music and other bits and pieces. If you do have it, oh, that's magnificent. I'm not going to say who it was. Jordan, I have to ask you, this is, because people are now, not everybody, let's rephrase it. There are some who are shocked. There are many who don't care and they think it's just the right thing to do. Got to hand it back because we are invaders. That's what they think. They've been told by the educators that we are the invaders. We stole the land. For those that are thinking that way, Jordan, and who are much, clapping, Jacinta Allen, any Labor government, Redlands is being the native title claim is being paid for legally by the federal government, which is great because they're now paying someone to divide us or financing a group to divide Australia. So for those who are just going, this is fantastic, let's just let this happen, Jordan, what would you say to those, and especially in Victoria, because it's a very woke state. It's a crazy, weak, insipid state at times.
It's funny because, you say that, Mike, but the reality is that Victorians voted no almost as strongly as every other state except Canberra, and we won't talk about Canberra. It's like the cousin you like to ignore at Christmas. I'm sure we'll be coming into that season soon. There's always that one. But Victorians, when they were given the opportunity, as Peter said, overwhelmingly voted against this. So I think that, while it is fun to treat Victoria as the pinata,
they're not doing anything now. No one is doing much now. So
no, and I think that the real answer to your question is that when rubber hits the road and these kinds of provisions start to impact people's everyday lives, they say that there's no irreligious men in the trenches, and in the same way, I think perhaps there might not be any bleeding heart leftists when the reality of the situation comes calling, because the little town of Natamak that we talked about last time I was on the program, the people in that town, by and large, are people who would have previously been Greens voters. They're people who actually care a lot about reconciliation, and they think that there do need to be steps taken to acknowledge past injustices and so forth. But what they've realised, and the reality of the situation has been brought home to them, that by making a very reasonable request that they be consulted, that their rights and connection with the land be taken into account and be part of the mix, not excluded from consideration, suddenly they're being branded by Greens members in the upper house as racists and as divisive and all this sort of thing. So, and they're shocked because they're saying, I don't understand. Like, we aren't arguing that, there shouldn't be, a reckoning, there shouldn't be sort of reconciliation, but now essentially suddenly this is all happening in our backyard and we're being treated like fascists for having reasonable disagreements. So I think that part of the problem is that for most Victorians, that's not their reality. These decisions are being made primarily by people in Melbourne, elected by people in Melbourne, but most strongly impacting people who live in regional Victoria.
But
so I think that's one big part of the problem.
And it's always been that way. Because I lived in Mildura, heaven forbid, I actually wouldn't call it living. Benny, I was there in Mildura.
Well, as I say every time you bring that up, the best thing about Mildura is that it's as far away as it's possible to be from Melbourne and still be in Victoria. So
Actually, you're being cruel now. Stop it. only I can say rude things about Mildura. But you are right though. The it's impacting those in the bush. I have to though ask Shalini, in Queensland, for example, with Redlands, it's not impacting those at the moment in the bush with this regard, with the Quandamooka native title claim. What it is doing, it's going to impact, and it is impacting suburbs and the major metropolitan area of Brisbane. So, where do you think this will end up? Tell me, because you mentioned that they're at wit's end at the moment, the Redlands Council. Your rates have gone up because of the trying to look after your local constituents, and the federal government is paying to have this progress through the courts with the aim of giving the Quandamooka the native title land claim over Redlands and then the city of Brisbane, or part of the city of Brisbane. Where will this end up? What's your feeling? And you mentioned it's taken, I think, 8 years or something. It's been going and going and going. When do we see the end of it? We probably need your microphone on too. That's good.
One thing I'd like to clarify is Redlands is only 35 minutes from Brisbane CBD. So we are very much in the urban area. And being a bayside, it's a very well-developed area. So it's not like a remote area which is being impacted. So whatever the court decision is in this case is going to set the precedent for every urban area around the country. So this is how important this particular case is. And it has been going on to and fro for 7 years. But given the support it has from the federal government, especially our current government, given the support it has from the framework that has been established in the last 7 to 10 years to support these kind of claims, it's most likely that it is going to go through. And what is going to transpire from here, we don't.
We do have a bit of a hiccup at the moment. In fact, we've just lost planet Earth.
I panicked that was me. I always, whenever there's a pause, I fear that it's my connection.
No,
Okay,
actually,
are we back?
yeah, we're back again. Keep going.
Okay. So we don't know what's going to transpire from this, especially the coastal claim, which is there currently on the urban area. But what we do have is certain concrete facts from the last 10 years on what has happened to the two claims that were made, and the determination was positive in both the cases. One was on the North Stradbroke Island, and second was on the Moreton Island. And for those who always argue that it is from the feel good factor point of view, there are certain very hard economic facts that we need to keep into consideration when we make these decisions. And unfortunately, our court system doesn't take into account those factors. So I'd like to bring some of those aspects to the attention of the panelists here. North Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island, both the islands are the world's biggest sand reserves. So it's the world's biggest sand reserves. And we have given exclusive rights to one corporation which has not more than 500 members to have an exclusive right on those two islands. So 500 people, one corporation, one small corporation with exclusive rights over close to 50,000 hectares of land and sea waterways. And also, I encourage people to have a look at the map of North Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island and Redland Bay. Just open the Google Maps and see how strategic these islands are from the national security point of view. Also, the Port of Brisbane, which carries 90% of the import and export of Queensland, that goes through the waterways which are now under the native title claim. So any extension work, any security work that's ever going to happen in this area would require a consultation from this particular organization and its directors. So this is this is what we have to deal with on an everyday basis. It is not only impacting our economy, it is also posing a serious question to our existence in this area. And the Aboriginal people, the population of Aboriginal people in this whole area is less than 4,000 people, out of which Quandamooka people are only 500 to 600. That's the small percentage we're talking about. And to give them those sort of rights, whether it's exclusive and non exclusive, it just baffles me. How can a court not consider those aspects in its decision making and simply go by what's written in the act? So, not quite sure, where we're going to stand with this.
Well, Peter Campion, now you're up near Cairns, in God's country. I would give my left foot to be able to live in Port Douglas at the moment. A couple of cold beers, beautiful sea breeze, a couple of thunderstorms just to shake me up. But I'll stay inside, thank you. But what's the feeling up there? I mean, Cairns it used to be a pretty wild place, especially when further north you head. It gets you call a spade is called a shovel. I mean, you're very, very, very Aussie, which again goes back to your values, traditional Australian values. What's the feeling further north? I mean, because we talked about Melbourne and Victoria, we've come now to Brisbane and Redlands and this magnificent part of the world, and now we're up north. What about the feeling up there, and what threats do you have? And by the way, if anybody wants to pop in, you can jump in and join the conversation. So Jordan and also Shalini.
It's regarded as a creeping cancer, Mike, and just to reference Port Douglas, I can remember when it was a very sleepy little fishing village, and it would have been a fantastic place to retire. And a work colleague, his family had a cabin on the coast just south of Port Douglas, which was just built. There was no permissions involved, and the whole area was very relaxed and very laid back, crime-free, a very cohesive culture across races. I went to school in Cairns North, not there anymore, in Cairns High, and my peer group, I was thinking about it years later, we had 7 different races, including one Aboriginal guy from Kuranda who came down with a rail motor each day, and a guy from TI who was probably the best athlete that I've ever met. Extraordinary physical abilities. We're a Greek guy, an Italian guy. I'm a mixed breed. I don't really know what I am. And there was never any mention of race. There was never any tension between races, but it's been created. So in Cairns, back when I was growing up, I think it was about 25,000 people when I became cognizant of such things, and we had one set of traffic lights. And it's basically been colonised by people, well, particularly since COVID. It's been colonised by people from the south, and they've brought the culture from down south with them, it's changed dramatically. It's very hostile, but the further out you get, the more original the countryside gets. So when you get out into the further reaches of the tablelands, you're out past Ravenshoe and Herberton and up towards Cooktown, it's very much the culture that we had in the 80s and 90s. And they look on at what's going on in the cities, what's going on in the political sphere, with utter disbelief. That they cannot understand how this has come about, particularly in the wake of the voice vote and the obvious deleterious effects that all of this planned destruction is having. And it's people are onto it. Yeah, the further away you get from the heavy concentrations of EMF and the electromagnetic fields and the fluoridated water and processed foods, the more connected you are with reality. But the better earthed you are, the more likely you are to be completely sane. And I think this is reflected in the inner city suburbs where they vote for the Greens, even though the implementation of the full green policy set would completely destroy them as a culture. And what a lot of people don't realise is when it comes to this planned destruction, in survival, like a tour guide in a remote area, a mate of mine was a tour coach captain for many years, taking people through the outback. And he could tell you all about the rule of three. So if you lose a tourist in a remote area, they've got, 3 minutes without air. If you happen to be on the reef with them or in some sort of diving scenario, they've got 3 days without water if they're in the outback. Or even in the jungle, if they can't find a creek or whatever, they've broken their leg and they can't move, then you've got 3 weeks without food before people start, fading away and dying. And the collapse of the systems that support a complex modern society is going to affect the people in the inner cities first. Where I am, I've got 95,000 litres of stored water in rainwater tanks, and I've got my infiltration system, and I can bring water just using gravity. I can hunt in this area. I can grow food on my acreage. I've got a small farm here and a couple of orchards. In a complete grid down collapse of Western civilization, we'd be right for a while. Eventually we'd run out of manufactured goods the same as everybody else. But it'd be chaos in the cities if they manage to throw the spanner in the works the way they're doing incrementally with things, every field of government activity you care to mention, climate and energy and land rights and native title, and the importation of massive numbers of people that we can't house. We don't have a cost of living crisis, we have a cost of government crisis, and it's affecting everybody really, really directly.
The reason I smile broadly when you say that, Peter, I smile with the biggest smile I can manage when you say that, because that was our campaign slogan for the Senate race down here in Victoria, and I had it up on some billboards, and it was sort of all around the state. It was excellent.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough for my honeymoon to be up in tropical North Queensland for 2 weeks, and of course my wife would have shot me for me saying this, but I was paying a lot of attention while we were there to. It's a very naturally libertarian area, especially Port Douglas and further north than that. Like once you go across the river, there's no phone lines, there's no power lines, there's it's very much it's that sort of harsh wild terrain, and people live accordingly. It turns out you don't need to tell people to be careful of this, to be watch for potholes, to watch for snakes, to watch for this. It's like when you have to do it, you do it. And the other thing that I noticed, which I thought was really fascinating, is Port Douglas has no public transport. There's no publicly owned bus system in Port Douglas. It's all private transfers, which are all pretty cheap. There's heaps of competition. And when it comes to the reef, the government isn't out on the Great Barrier Reef, even out on the Quicksilver, platform there, watching and observing and monitoring and making sure that everyone's being good to the environment and not taking things off the reef and not touching fish and coral and stuff. Guess what? The businesses, the private tourism companies that are responsible for an income that derives from that are the best custodians of that natural environment. And I think that one of the big hidden costs of all of this is you're untethering responsibility from the profit motive, from the actual need to take care of it and to make sure it's enjoyable and shareable by everyone. And if you look at what's happening in Victoria, is that the tendency is that once these areas of wilderness and Crown land are handed over, and either control in some cases or consultation in others, you then find that it's almost like locked away. And that's the first stage of people being excluded. But then I suspect the next stage will be that these Aboriginal landowner corporations will essentially farm out and lease out the rights they have to often foreign multinational companies to provide tourism services and so forth. Because as you say, really, these entities are quite low governance. They're quite low transparency. They're often just a couple of families, and I suspect that this will essentially become a revenue-raising exercise. So local people, local businesses will be pushed out, and then foreign businesses will be brought in under the auspices of the traditional landowners. So that's I think, an important nuance in there that it occurred to me as you were talking.
Just on those lines, Jaden, what's most interesting is the pattern that's building around the state. Had it been just patch here and there, we would ignore it. But now, in the last 20 years, especially in the last 10 years, we've seen a pattern that's going on. There are certain areas which they go for easily, and then once that's done, then it's kind of a next. It's like there is no stop to that. It's like as if they've been incentivized to actually go and do it, but it's not justified in any logical sense whatsoever, both from the claimant perspective as well as from the point of view of the government giving over these handing over these lands or having these indigenous land use agreements here and there. So there's definitely benefit. There are parties which are benefiting from it. It's just that there is nobody who's doing a national audit on it to tell us, okay, what percentage of these native title lands, what kind of land use agreements have been done, and okay, which companies actually benefit from it. We don't have that data as citizens, and it seems like neither side of the politics is willing to do an inquiry into it, but the pattern is building and nobody can deny that pattern, but it's just nobody is willing to talk about it.
Also,
They deliberately make it so complicated that
And on the
it
lines,
almost,
yeah,
yeah,
but I just want to make,
it's almost,
I just want Shalini's comment on Tubia, which is, Peter and I would agree would be one of the great names. Even Jordan, Tubia should be 3 or 4, but Tubia, I mean, it's gone through the native land title claim, it's all signed, sealed and delivered. And what they have, this is how crazy it is, they were given 10 acres. That's all they're allowed to have. The rest of it does not belong to them anymore, including public works and stuff like that. Will that happen to Redlands, do you think, Shalini?
oh, it's already starting to show the signs. Our local scouts hall has been asked to, not continue organizing their meets there. They've got a claim over the Performing Arts Center. They've got claims over our parks. It's basically going to get, and Redland is still fairly not very developed. Like we still have a lot of crown land over there. So it could pretty much happen. It won't happen to the extent of Tubia because it is an urban land, but we would see these kind of landlocked situations happening, which would transpire into something else going forward.
And this is a state. This is a state-driven impasse on a particular community. So what we have is the states, and it was done. It was passed, I think, 2 days before the state election, and then the LNP got in, and who knows what they would have done anyway. But they got in, and then we have Peter. You must be alarmed at the federal government. It's actually funding the legal expenses for the Quandamooka land title grab.
yeah, well, of course, it's not the federal government funding, it's the Australian taxpayer, because people keep forgetting governments have no money of their own. They only have the money that they can extract from us. And from the macro view, the entirety of the land rights precedents law that they've built up and the lack of clarity about it stems from the false application of the false extension, rather, of the Mabo decision to the mainland. And you've got to remember that there's been 3 waves of colonisation of Australia prior to the British and the Europeans arriving here in the late 1700s. You had, first of all, the Negritos came from Africa across the land bridges. Then they were displaced by the Mauritians some 15,000 years later. So the Negritos about 40,000 years, and the Mauritians about 25,000 years, and then sometime between 8 and 15,000 years ago, the current Aboriginal colonisers arrived, the Carpentarians, who are most closely related to the Vedda from southern India and Sri Lanka. But the Torres Strait Islanders were a different race again. They were Pacific Islanders, and they had a completely different culture to mainland Aboriginals. So the Mabo precedent had no application in mainland Australia. However, it was forced by the same globalist forces that are operating in every nation in order to squander our wealth, to create division, to as Jordan touched on earlier, develop and build these corporations so that they can, eventually take over. Now, ultimately, they'll use the lack of management of land. Now, the Australian landscape's been managed for 40,000 years, and fire was a major tool. And my background is a fireman. And if you don't manage a fuel load, you're going to have uncontrollable fires. You're going to have a much bigger fire scar.
As
and
we saw
they
in
use
Victoria
that.
very recently.
Yep, and they say, oh, that's climate change. Well, no, it's land management change. But they're going to use that to get people off the remote communities. So Cape York's covered, well, not literally, but there's remote communities scattered all around, which are completely dysfunctional. They're effectively socialist enclaves propped up by a capitalist system so they can never fail. And the residents there would be infinitely better assimilating in a major town and getting decent educations for their kids and getting jobs and being productive members of society, breaking the drink and drug and social media habit. But they're kept there as a victim class to attract votes in the inner city, that they can convince the Greens voters, oh, look, we're doing all this for the Aboriginals of Cape York, aren't we good? You better vote for us. But what they're going to do is they're going to use this fake climate crisis, which doesn't exist, and the expansion of the fire scar to eventually declare that the remote communities are untenable, and they've got to bring these people into the cities whether they like it or not, and they're going to go into the 200 square foot pods, the 20 metre or so square, 20 or so square metre pods that the globalists were talking about at the World Economic Forum, and they'll have to get their injections and be tracked and traced and eat the bugs, the whole thing. This is being pushed very gradually. It's salami slice politics. They're taking a millimetre at a time off the salami, and eventually we'll all be stacked in these cities in the middle of these mega cities, and we'll have our little 15-minute district that we're not allowed to leave, without a permit. This is the planned digital matrix they're bringing in, and just native title is just one cog in that giant machine.
So the scarcity of the land is so evident in Redlands and Bayside area that an average block of land of 400 meters goes anywhere from 800,000 to $1 million plus. That's the cost of the land. Here we're talking about cost of housing crisis, but at the same time, we are landlocking ourselves so that the available land to the property developers for the release of the land is no longer available. So once all this land is given to the corporation or has a native title claim on it, no property developer would come in this area for more land, or even if they come, the price of the land is going to be much higher because they will have to negotiate with this corporation. So it doesn't solve a problem. It is actually aggravating the problem of cost of living for people like us. And it really burns us when we say this corporation who allowed them this tax-free entitlement. All these corporations don't pay any income tax. They don't pay any land tax on all the land that's given to them. They don't pay even the stamp duty, transfer duty like we do. So from a citizen's point of view, Peter, this is so unfair distribution. Like we have to work hard and pay the mortgage on a small block of land, whereas a small group of people of 400, 500 people whose income is exactly the same as an average people, not that they're deprived of anything. They go to the same colleges, their children go to the same kindergarten, they earn the same standard of living, and that's been proven in the census. They get this privilege. I mean, this is the biggest class division one can see. And Redlands is a classic case. I would like some senator to pick it up and just say, here it is, 15 years, what have we done? Is this fair on the 99% of the population of the Bayside? It is not a fair distribution at all. We are the one who need the voice in the parliament, honestly. That's where it has come to. We don't have any voice whatsoever.
I have to ask Jordan, in Victoria, which is probably the most severe case I would see at the moment. There is no regard for anybody except that they have this mindset and they're going to do what they need to do. tell us about Victoria and the exclusive rights, and just touching on that. Let's just talk about also the magnificent King Valley in Gippsland, where they're going to bulldoze it and put in thousands upon thousands upon thousands of solar panels, along with all the wind turbines, which is up and down the coastline. 1.38 trillion they're spending initially, and then it will keep going and going. Tell us about the state of Victoria at the moment. I always thought, and I know it's old-fashioned, it's a bit, well, in your day, I always thought that the government worked for us.
Well, I was saying to my fellow panelists before this started that I used to say, well, look, Victoria's got bad weather, I'll grant you, but we've got good coffee and it's a pretty good place to live. Now I have to say, unfortunately, all we've got is bad weather and socialism. So the truth is that I think Victoria is first because of its demographics, but I don't think it will be last, and I think the contagion will spread. Victoria is rapidly starting to look like a third world country, and that's even in the cities. We had over the weekend Coles say that 71% of all theft in their stores Australia-wide happens in Victoria. And, we've just got this relentless march towards essentially turning our state into either an exporter of things that will get sold back to us, in the case of like natural gas, for example, and soon to be onshore coal and other things. And, there's just no limit to what will be accepted and no limit to how much Kool-Aid will be swallowed. And Victoria, I think, there's two ways of looking at this, Mike, and I think to be a libertarian, Peter will probably vouch for this, and as will my colleague from Queensland, you have to be a bit of an optimist to be a libertarian. But I think that the silver lining in all of this is that Victoria will be the worst, and it will get a lot worse before it gets better. And as I say every time I'm on this program, that is in part, no small part, to the weakness of our Liberal Party opposition here in Victoria as well. But I think that the one positive out of that situation is that Victoria will probably be the first for the turnaround to happen, because the problems will become so bad and the performance and the difference between Victoria and other states will become so great that, like Argentina, people will actually begin to understand where these problems are coming from, because the reality will be unavoidable, and they will begin to understand that the solutions, as we're seeing in Argentina, are very much those of capitalism and the free market, which allowed us to have all these fantasy indulgences in the first place.
Well, I just want to butt in here. Shalini, it's not that easy, is it? Once they're in place, how can you rescind a decision?
Actually, no. So there is no legal recourse available to the public or even to a council or a state government or federal government once the determination is final, whether the determination is made by the court or by consent. Either cases, once the determination is made, it can only be challenged by the people within that group itself. So it has to be one of the directors of the corporation, or it has to be by the group itself, where if they disagree with something, or at some stage they make a decision of handing it back to the government and actually accepting the compensation instead, which is also one of the provisions that's available in the Native Title Act.
So, Peter, no matter how much jumping up and down that Jordan says that they will end up doing, which they will, all they'll be doing is getting fit.
Yeah, the constitutional scholar Arthur Tresby unpacked the obligations that our representatives have in the parliament, and it's simply this: to represent our will. And the Uni Party is not representing our will. All they've got to do is go to their electorate and ask around what people want. We want the cost of government crisis brought down. We want the division to end. We want to retain the remnants of our culture and rebuild that. And they're not doing it because they're not representing our will. We've got to ask ourselves, whose agenda are they implementing if it's not ours? Where do their loyalties lie? That's what we've got to get to. And we're not going to get it by voting for the Uni Party. We're really going to have to get the whole lot of them out of our parliaments and start again with libertarians and with what we call now the minor parties. we've got to work hard to keep our senators and our MPs away from the lobbyists. Lobbyists should not be able to walk through our parliament and walk into our members and senators' offices and demand they do certain things or bribe or blackmail them, whatever does go on down there behind the scenes. They should absolutely be banned from the parliamentary precinct. And maybe then we'll start to get some actual representation back. But we've got to break the insidious influence of these foreign billionaires on our representatives and require them to represent us and what we want in our parliament. And no one wants the division of native title. Nobody, not even the Aboriginal people. They just want to get along.
So the
So,
only solution which I see is the amendment to the Native Title Act, moving away from the United Nations Declaration. And in order to do that, we need to have a Senate inquiry in place, and if possible, a Royal Commission inquiry, which is a long way. But if we get a Senate inquiry, even on case-to-case basis, such as taking Redland Bay or Tubia as a case basis, even if we start with that at a micro level, saying, okay, let's do that, then we can come close to making some sort of rethinking about the Native Title Act. And that's the only thing we can get started with.
yeah, I agree, and I think we're in for a long haul, Jordan, aren't we? And we're going to wrap this up now. So this will be the last time we hear from you for at least a week. But we are in for a long haul. We heard and it is distressing that once the decision is made, you can't do much about it. Where does that leave Victoria?
Yeah, well, I think it is concerning, and I think that my personal belief is that it's incumbent on any government not simply to consent or to reach settlements on these matters. The whole premise of native title, as fictional and self-serving or agenda-serving as I agree with Peter that it is, in the Mabo case, there were very clear requirements set out, including continuity of tradition, including continued use and relationship with the land. And essentially, those requirements become meaningless if governments simply do a deal with applicants for political convenience or, agreement with their cause or whatever. It shouldn't be possible for a consent arrangement to be entered into where the fundamental underlying elements of native title can't be made out. And we've seen, outside of Mabo and a few notable exceptions, where native title has gone to court, for example, in the Yorta Yorta people situation, which was up in the Murray area in Victoria, frequently the courts will hold that while they have sympathy for the original connection these people had with the land, the realities of colonisation, the realities of freehold, and the realities of cultural dispersal are what they are. And the fact is that many of these elements are very difficult to prove, as they should be, because it was never intended to be a blanket application that governments could simply sort of slap on a rubber stamp and say she'll be right. So I think that's a really important thing here, and I think we need to hold governments to account of both parties.
Shirley, what do you think? We are wrapping this up, but what do you think? Do you, because it is, it's quite, it's very upsetting. It's full of despair that we can't rescind or wind back, unless you go through hoops of all proportions. You can't wind back or rescind a very, very bad decision that divides Australia.
Look, it's a long haul, but what we can do in the meantime is start to bring it in the public debate like we are doing today. And that's when people will wake up, that's when the pressure will build up. So by next federal election, I would like native title to be the biggest issue that's discussed openly, because one cannot ignore land. So it's the awareness campaign that we all need to focus as citizens, as libertarians. We are doing it over here, and then take it from there. We definitely need the political will in order to make a decision. But if we can gather enough pressure and have the right party elected, then maybe we will see some changes going forward. In the meantime, the only pressure I can ask from the politicians is to stop giving these handouts of funding for putting these endless claims. At least that will stop, because it's just right, left, and center, and it's not making any sense.
and Peter Campion, who looks at things, it's not black and white, it's just how we should see things. This is so un-Australian, or is it?
It's completely un-Australian. It's driven by foreigners. I wish I shared Shelley's hope that this mess can be unpicked, but short of getting the entire Labor, Liberal, National Green Teal Uni Party out of every parliament in this nation and electing a whole new cadre of representatives who are going to implement the will of the Australian electorate in accordance with their constitutional obligations, I just can't see any way forward. I think we're headed for the planned collapse of Western civilization, and the evidence points that in every Western nation. They're trying to trigger civil war in the UK right now. Where does that lead? This is a very interesting time to be alive.
Yeah, and I think we will continue throughout the week, and next week we're going to have different panels because it is very serious. It's changing with the Labor Party, Labor government, and the Conservatives, because successive governments or administrations have sold Australians out, including the Aboriginal people. So it's we're all, whether you're black, yellow, pink, whatever, we're all Australians. And I undoubtedly agree with all of you that we have lost that at the moment. We're not thinking about that we are all Australians. We're divided. And I think, the old saying, united we stand or divided we fall. And I think we are in deep, deep trouble. I've got to thank Jordan Ditlop. Thank you Ditlop. Thank you. So I got your name wrong. Thank you very much for your time. Shalini Basin, thank you. And Peter Campion, always a pleasure chatting with you, Peter. We need your daughter on shortly, I think, too. Thank you so much for all of your work. And we will continue this discussion. This is The World Today, and this is The Protagonists, and thank you very much.